The Galactic Dominion had existed for over 12,000 years. 17 different species worked together under one rule. That rule was simple: find dangerous worlds and destroy them before they became a problem. They had done this to over 400 planets. Some of those worlds had great cities. Some had music and art. Some had children who dreamed of touching the stars. None of that mattered. The Dominion believed in safety through extinction. Admiral Vorath stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Silence. He was tall, even for his kind, with gray skin that looked like stone and eyes that glowed a soft orange. He had led the extinction fleet for 60 years. In that time, he had ended 9 civilizations. He felt nothing about it. To him, it was simply work. His second officer approached with a data tablet. Admiral, Target 4817 has been approved for cleansing. The Council has signed the order. Vorath took the tablet and looked at the information. Target 4817. A small blue planet orbiting a yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The natives called it Earth. They had been watching it for 30 years. Pre-spacefaring, Vorath read aloud. Aggressive tendencies. Multiple global conflicts. Nuclear weapons developed and used against their own kind. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. They kill each other with primitive atomic bombs. How dangerous could they possibly be? The Council believes they will reach interstellar capability within 200 years, his officer said. They want the problem solved before then. Vorath nodded slowly. 200 ships would make the journey. It would take 18 days to reach the Sol system. The humans would see them coming, but they would be able to do nothing. Their fastest ships could barely leave their own gravity well. Their weapons could not scratch Dominion shields. It would be quick. It would be clean. And then Target 4817 would become another empty world, another success for the fleet. Begin the jump sequence, Vorath ordered. We leave within the hour. Far across the galaxy, on the planet that had just been marked for death, Park Tae-ho was having a very bad night. He worked at the Yongsan Deep Space Observatory, a large facility built into the mountains south of Seoul. His job was simple: listen to the stars. For 15 years, he had searched for signals from other worlds. He had found nothing. Most nights were quiet. Most nights were boring. This night was different. Tae-ho stared at his screen, his coffee growing cold beside him. The readings made no sense. There was energy out. There are massive amounts of energy moving toward their solar system. Not one source. Hundreds of sources. All traveling together in formation. His hands shook as he ran the calculations again. The result was the same. 200 objects, each larger than anything humanity had ever built, were heading directly for Earth. At their current speed, they would arrive in 18 days. He picked up his phone and called his supervisor. Then his supervisor called the government. Within 3 hours, every major world leader had received the same report. Humanity was not alone. And something was coming. General Kim Nari received the call at 3 a.m. She was 52 years old, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She had served in the military for 30 years. She had fought in 2 wars. She had buried friends. But nothing had prepared her for this. She stood in the emergency command center beneath the Blue House, surrounded by screens showing data from observatories around the world. Scientists spoke in rapid voices, arguing about what the objects might be. Politicians demanded answers she did not have. And through it all, one fact remained clear. Whatever was coming, humanity could not stop it. General, one of her aides said, "The American president is asking what our military response will be." Nari almost laughed. Military response. Their best missiles could reach space, yes. Their best weapons could destroy cities. But those objects out there were crossing distances that light itself took years to travel. Humanity's entire nuclear arsenal would be like throwing stones at a hurricane. "Tell them we are assessing our options," she said. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. That night, Park Tae-ho made a decision. He had spent his whole life searching for proof that humanity was not alone. Now he had that proof, and it was coming to kill them. He could not accept that humanity would die in silence. He began accessing old files. declassified documents, hidden projects. He searched through decades of forgotten research, looking for anything that might help, and in the deepest archives, he found it. Project Echo. It had been created during the Cold War, when nuclear annihilation seemed certain. The idea was simple. If humanity was going to die, it would not be forgotten. Project Echo was designed to broadcast every piece of human history. Every song, every war, every triumph, and every failure into the void. A monument made of radio waves. A message that would outlast the species. Taeho read the files 3 times. Then he called General Kim Nari directly. "General," he said, "I think I have an idea. But you're going to need to listen carefully." In the command center. Surrounded by people preparing for a war they could not win, Nari listened. And slowly her expression changed. The despair in her eyes faded, replaced by something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "You want to talk to them?" she said. "No," Taeho replied. "I want to scare them." Above Earth, satellites continued their silent orbits. Planes still flew. Children still went to school. Most of the world did not know that death was coming. But in that underground room, a small group of people began to plan something that had never been tried before. They could not fight the enemy. They could not run from them. So instead, they would send a message. They would show these aliens exactly what humanity was, every beautiful thing and every terrible thing. They would make the Dominion understand that Earth was not just another target. It was a warning, and in 18 days. The galaxy would learn why humans were afraid of the Dark Hand, why the dark should be afraid of them. The world learned the truth on day 3. Governments had tried to keep it secret, but secrets do not last long when 200 alien ships are visible through telescopes. Panic spread like wildfire. Riots broke out in major cities. Some people prayed. Some people screamed. Some people simply held their families and waited, but others refused to wait. Others chose to fight not with weapons, but with something far more dangerous. Yoon Hannah was 28 years old. She worked in the Seoul Emergency Coordination Center, processing data and managing communications during natural disasters. She was good at finding information. She was even better at finding information that people wanted to stay hidden. When the news broke, her supervisor gave everyone the option to go home. Most people left. Hannah stayed. She sat at her desk and began searching through every government database she could access. If humanity was going to die, she wanted to know if anyone had ever planned for this. That was how she found the full files on Project Echo. The original project had been simple, just a broadcast of human culture, meant to prove that humanity had existed. But buried in the files were additional documents written by military planners who thought about things differently. These documents asked a different question. What if the broadcast could be used as a weapon? Hannah read through the night. When morning came, she picked up her phone and called the one person she knew who might listen, her former university professor, who now worked as an advisor to the Defense Council. 3 hours later, she was standing in front of General Kim Nari. "You're saying we should send them a message?" Nari said. Her voice was flat, tired. She had not slept in 2 days. "Not just a message," Hannah replied. "A demonstration. Project Echo was designed to show who we are, but we can choose what we show them. We can choose what story we tell." Nari leaned back in her chair. Around her, officers and scientists argued about evacuation plans that would save only a fraction of the population. About underground bunkers that might protect a few thousand people for a few years. About hope that did not exist. "What exactly do you want to show them?" Nari asked. Hannah took a deep breath. "Everything. Every war we've ever fought. Every weapon we've ever built. Every time we were beaten down and got back up. Every genocide. Every plague. Every disaster. And how we survived them all. I want to show them that we've been trying to kill ourselves for 10,000 years, and we're still here." Silence filled the room. Then, slowly, Nari began to smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a soldier who had just found a weapon. "Get Park Taeho," she ordered, "and find me Lieutenant Choi Woo from Military Communications. We have work to do." Choi Woo was 34 years old. He was a quiet man who preferred machines to people. He had spent his career encoding military transmissions, making sure that messages reached the right ears and stayed hidden from the wrong ones. He had never imagined his skills would be used to speak to aliens. When he arrived at the command center, General Nari explained the plan. His first reaction was disbelief. His second was excitement. "You want to weaponize our history?" he said. "I want to weaponize our nature," Nari corrected. "Can you make it work?" Wu nodded slowly. "We have the transmission equipment. We have access to every archive on Earth. But if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. We can't just send them random footage of wars. We need to tell a story. We need to make them understand." That was when Park Tae-ho spoke up. He had been studying the alien ship's communication frequencies. He had found patterns ways they encoded information. If they could match those patterns, the aliens would not be able to ignore the transmission. "They'll have to receive it," Tae-ho said. "They'll have no choice but to see what we send them." The team came together quickly. Scientists, historians, military strategists, and artists from around the world were brought in. Each of them understood the mission. They were creating humanity's final statement. It had to be perfect. Kang Minji was a historian from Busan. She specialized in the study of resistance, movements people who fought back against impossible odds. She had written books about partisans in World War II, about guerrilla fighters in Vietnam, about rebels who refused to surrender even when everything was lost. When she was asked to join the project, she did not hesitate. "You want to scare them?" she said during her first meeting with the team. "But fear fades. What you really want is doubt. You want them to lie awake at night wondering if they made a mistake. You want them to look at their victory and see their own destruction written in it." She began compiling records, not just of battles, but of what came after. How conquered people remembered, how they taught their children to hate, how resistance movements survived for generations, passed down through stories and songs, how humans never truly surrendered, they just waited. "Show them that even if they win, they lose," Minji said. "Show them that we are patient, that we remember, that we will never stop." The days passed quickly. Teams worked around the clock, gathering footage and documents and data. They compiled statistics on human warfare that made even the generals uncomfortable. They documented every weapon humanity had ever created to kill itself and how each one led to something worse. By day 7, the transmission was ready. Wu had designed a delivery system that would broadcast on every frequency the aliens used. Tae-ho had calculated the timing so the message would reach the fleet while they still had time to turn back. Hannah had organized over 50 terabytes of data into a single, coherent story, and Mingi had written the ending, a single sentence, that would be spoken in every human language. "We have always been at war. We are very, very good at it. And we do not forgive." General Nari stood before the broadcast controls. Her hand rested on the activation switch. Around her, the team waited in silence. "If this doesn't work," she said quietly, "we die. But if we don't try, we die anyway. At least this way they'll know who we were." She pressed the switch, and across the void of space, humanity began to speak. The transmission began with silence. 3 seconds of nothing, designed to make the listener pay attention. Then came a voice, calm, steady, and completely without emotion. It spoke in the mathematical language that all spacefaring civilizations shared, the universal tongue of numbers and physics. "This is Earth," the voice said. "This is what we are." The first section showed Earth's history of extinction. Not extinction caused by outside forces, but extinction caused by the planet itself. Ice ages that killed 90% of all life. Volcanic eruptions that darkened the sky for years. Asteroids that turned the world to fire. 5 mass extinction events, each one nearly ending all life on the planet. And after each one, life came back, stronger, more stubborn. More determined to survive, the transmission showed the rise of humanity. Small creatures that should have died. Creatures with no claws, no fangs, no armor. Creatures that, by all logic, should have been prey for larger beasts. Instead, they became the most dangerous things their world had ever produced. The next section focused on human warfare. And this was where the tone changed. Statistics filled the transmission. Cold numbers that told a story of endless conflict. In the last 10,000 years, humans had fought over 15,000 recorded wars. They had developed weapons that could level cities in seconds. They had killed each other by the hundreds of millions. They had used poison gas, biological agents, nuclear fire. They had invented new ways to cause suffering, and then used those ways on themselves. The broadcast showed footage, real footage, taken from human archives. Cities burning. Soldiers charging into gunfire. Bodies in trenches. Mushroom clouds rising over test sites. The transmission did not look away from any of it. It showed everything, clearly and without comment. But it was not the violence that made the broadcast terrifying. It was what came after. The transmission showed what humans did after their wars. How they rebuilt cities from rubble. How survivors walked out of nuclear wastelands and started again. How populations that had been reduced by half grew back within generations. How technology improved after every major conflict. As if war itself made humans stronger, Lieutenant Choi Woo had added charts to this section. Simple graphs showing population growth after major plagues, industrial output after world wars, scientific advancement after every period of destruction. The data told a clear story. Humans did not just survive catastrophe. They fed on it. Park Tae-ho had insisted on including a section about human space exploration. Not their current limited technology, but their history of reaching for the stars. How they had sent humans to their moon using computers less powerful than children's toys. How they had launched probes that would travel for billions of years. How they had sent messages into the void, hoping someone would answer. They are not afraid of the unknown, Tae-ho had argued. They run toward it. That's what makes them dangerous. The broadcast showed this too. Humans climbing into metal tubes and riding explosions into orbit. Humans walking on the surface of their moon, millions of kilometers from home, knowing that any small failure meant death. The joy on their faces as they looked up at the stars. Then came Kung Minji's section. And this was the heart of the transmission. She had compiled records of every major resistance movement in human history. The broadcast showed conquered peoples who refused to accept defeat, guerrilla fighters who harassed occupying armies for decades, underground networks that survived even when their nations fell, children taught to hate their conquerors before they could walk. The transmission showed specific examples. Countries occupied for generations that never stopped fighting. Resistance movements that operated with nothing but stolen weapons and pure hatred. Prisoners of war who died under torture rather than reveal information. Soldiers who charged enemy positions knowing they would not survive. Minji had added psychological data to this section. Studies on human endurance. Research on how long humans could survive without food, without water, without hope. The results were disturbing. Humans regularly survived conditions that should have killed them. Kept alive by nothing but will. The broadcast showed humans surviving freezing temperatures by burning their own body fat. Humans walking for days with wounds that should have been fatal. Humans carrying injured companions through impossible terrain. Humans who refused to die, even when their bodies had given up. Then came the final section. The warning. The transmission showed calculations. Simple math that any spacefaring civilization would understand. If the Dominion attacked Earth, they would win. Their technology was superior. Their numbers were greater. They would burn the cities and kill billions. But they would not kill everyone. Human history proved this. Humans survived ice ages in caves. They survived plagues in hidden villages. They survived nuclear attacks in underground bunkers. Some percentage would always survive, and those survivors would remember. The broadcast showed what happened to empires that had conquered human peoples. How resistance movements grew in the shadows. How occupiers lived in constant fear. How victory turned to defeat over decades, over centuries. How the conquered always, eventually, rose up. The transmission presented a simple prediction. If the Dominion attacked Earth, they would spend the next 1,000 years hunting human survivors scattered across the galaxy. They would lose ships and soldiers to ambushes and sabotage. They would watch as humans stole their technology and turned it against them. And eventually, maybe not for generations, but eventually humans would find them. And humans would not forgive. The broadcast ended with a final statement. The same sentence, spoken in every human language: Mandarin, English, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, Korean, Russian, 200 languages. One after another, each one carrying the same message. We have always been at war. We are very, very good at it. And we do not forgive. Then silence. The transmission lasted exactly 47 hours. It was broadcast continuously, repeating over and over, sent toward the approaching fleet on every frequency they used. There was no way to ignore it, no way to turn it off. Every ship in the Dominion fleet would receive it whether they wanted to or not, on Earth. The team watched their monitors and waited. They had done everything they could. They had turned their darkest history into a weapon. Now they could only hope it would be enough. 7 days remained before the fleet arrived. Admiral Vorath was sleeping when the transmission reached his flagship. An officer woke him with urgent news. The target planet was broadcasting something. This was unusual, but not concerning. Pre-spacefaring species often sent out desperate messages when they saw the fleet coming. Pleas for mercy. Offers of surrender. Prayers to gods that did not answer. Vorath dressed slowly and walked to the communications center. He expected to spend a few minutes listening to primitive begging before ordering his officers to ignore it. He did not expect to still be standing there 18 hours later. The first hour of the transmission was interesting. The second hour was unsettling. By the 6th hour, Vorath had ordered every officer in the fleet to watch. By the 12th hour, 3 of his intelligence analysts had requested immediate transfer to non-combat positions. Vorath stood motionless as the broadcast continued. His orange eyes never blinked. His stone-gray face showed no expression. But inside, something was changing. The Dominion had conquered many species. Some fought back briefly before dying. Some surrendered immediately and begged for mercy. Some tried to hide in caves and mountains, only to be burned out and destroyed. In all his years, Vorath had never encountered anything like this. These creatures, these humans, were insane. They killed each other constantly, not in small conflicts, but in wars that covered their entire planet. They developed weapons specifically designed to cause the most suffering possible. And then they used those weapons on members of their own species. They had discovered atomic energy and immediately built bombs. They had discovered disease and immediately turned it into weapons. And yet they did not destroy themselves. That was the part Vorath could not understand. Any other species would have burned itself out within a few generations. Humans had been fighting for thousands of years, and their population kept growing. Their technology kept advancing. They kept getting more dangerous. He called a meeting of his senior officers. Analysis, he ordered. Tell me what we're dealing with. Commander Sith, his chief intelligence officer, stepped forward. She was younger than Vorath, but her eyes had the same cold look. She had watched the entire transmission 3 times. They are pre-spacefaring, she began, but only barely. Our estimates suggest they will achieve interstellar travel within 150 years. Possibly sooner. Their technological advancement accelerates after every major conflict, and their military capacity. Sith hesitated. This was unusual for her. Their current weapons cannot harm our ships. But that is not the concern. The concern is their documented behavior under occupation. She brought up data from the transmission. Graphs and charts showing resistance movements throughout human history, survival rates of guerrilla fighters, time required to fully pacify conquered human populations. The average is 73 years, Sith said quietly. 73 years of active resistance before a conquered human population stops fighting. And even then, passive resistance continues for generations. They teach their children to hate their conquerors. They hide weapons. They wait. Vorath stared at the data. We have dealt with resistance before. Not like this. Sith changed the display. These statistics show what happens when humans are conquered by other humans' beings. They understand. beings who share their biology and culture. Against an alien occupier? Our models predict resistance would never end. Not in 73 years. Not in 700 years. They would keep fighting until they won, or until every last one of them was dead. Another officer spoke up. Then we ensure every last one is dead. Complete planetary bombardment. Leave nothing alive. Voreth considered this. It was the standard solution. Burn the surface until nothing could survive. Boil the oceans. Crack the continents. Turn the planet into a lifeless rock. But the transmission had shown something else. Humans surviving in caves for thousands of years. Humans emerging from underground shelters after nuclear attacks. Humans adapting to radiation, to cold, to heat, to conditions that killed other species. Calculate survival probability, Voreth ordered. Total planetary bombardment. What percentage survives? The tactical officer ran the numbers. The silence stretched on longer than it should have. Between 0.3 and 0.7%, he finally said. Possibly higher. They have built extensive underground facilities. They have stored food, water, genetic material. Even with complete surface destruction, some would survive. Voreth did the math in his head. Earth had 8 billion inhabitants. Even at 0.3% survival, it left 24 million humans alive, hidden, angry, and now with proof that alien civilizations existed, civilizations that could be reached, that could be fought. They would spread, Sith said, reading his thoughts. They would steal technology. They would take ships. Within a few generations, they would scatter across the galaxy, and every single one of them would remember what we did. The room fell silent. Every officer understood what she was saying. The Dominion was vast, but it was not everywhere. Humans hidden among the stars would be almost impossible to find, and based on their history, they would spend centuries building toward one goal: revenge. Voreth walked to the main viewing screen. The blue dot of Earth was still too far away to see, but he knew it was there, waiting. Cost, he said slowly. Calculate the cost of full extermination, not just the bombardment. The centuries of hunting survivors, the resources needed, the ships and soldiers we would lose to their resistance. The tactical officer worked for several minutes. When he looked up, his face had gone pale. It would cripple the fleet for 300 years, Admiral, and we cannot guarantee success. Their survival instincts are beyond anything in our databases. Some would escape, some would survive, and they would never stop coming for us. Voreth made his decision. All ships halt advance. New course heading, away from the Sol system. The bridge went silent. No one questioned the order. They had all seen the transmission. They had all looked into the eyes of humanity and seen something that frightened even them. The extinction fleet turned back. On Earth. Park Taiho was the first to notice. He had not slept in days, watching his monitors for any change. When the fleet's trajectory shifted, he stared at the data for a full minute before he believed it. Then he started laughing. They were turning around. The greatest military force in the galaxy had looked at humanity and decided to run away. The transmission had worked. The news of humanity's survival spread slowly at first. Governments confirmed that the alien fleet had changed course. Scientists verified that the ships were moving away from Earth. Within a week, the whole world knew they had won. Against all odds, against an enemy they could not fight, humanity had survived. The celebration lasted for months. People danced in streets that had been filled with panic just weeks before. Leaders gave speeches about human resilience. Religions declared miracles. Artists created monuments to the transmission that had saved them all. But General Kim Nari did not celebrate. She understood something that most people did not. The danger was not over. It had simply changed. The transmission didn't just reach the Dominion fleet, Park Taeho explained to her during a private meeting. It went everywhere. Every communication network in this region of the galaxy received it. Every spacefaring civilization within 1,000 light-years has now seen what we sent. Nari nodded slowly. So they all know about us now. They all know what we are now, Taiho corrected. We told the galaxy that humans are violent, stubborn, and impossible to destroy. That message will have consequences. He was right. Within 3 months, Earth received its first alien communication. It did not come from the Dominion. It came from a species called the Kethsmal, fragile beings who had been conquered by the Dominion centuries ago. They had lived as servants ever since, following orders, doing what they were told. They had forgotten what freedom meant. Then they saw the transmission. Their message was simple. We watched your broadcast. We wish to learn. Yunhana was now working in Earth's newly formed Interstellar Relations Division. She had helped create the transmission that saved humanity, and now she was responsible for managing its consequences. When the Keth message arrived, she was the first to analyze it. They're asking for help, she told General Nari. Not military help, not yet. They want to know how we do it. How we keep fighting when everything seems hopeless. How we teach our children to remember. How we refuse to surrender. More messages followed. Species that had lived under Dominion rule for generations. Species that had been conquered so long ago, they barely remembered being free. Species that had given up hope until they saw a blue planet on the edge of the galaxy stand up to the greatest military force in known space. They all asked the same thing. How? Kang Minji found herself in high demand. Her expertise in resistance movements, once a quiet academic specialty, was now the most valuable knowledge on Earth. Governments around the world asked her to train diplomats and advisors. She wrote guides that were translated into alien languages. She taught humans how to teach others to fight. We're becoming something new, she told Hannah during a late-night conversation. Not just a species that survived. A symbol. A proof that resistance is possible, Hannah nodded. She had seen the data. Across the galaxy, things were changing. Small rebellions breaking out on Dominion worlds, whispered conversations in occupied territories, children being taught old songs that had been forbidden for centuries. The Dominion noticed. They had to notice. The species they had controlled for thousands of years were looking at Earth and seeing something dangerous. Hope. 6 months after the fleet turned back, a Dominion diplomatic vessel entered the Sol system. It was small, only a scout ship, and it came broadcasting messages of peace. They wanted to talk. General Nari met their ambassador in a neutral location on Earth's moon. The Dominion representative was tall and gray, similar to Admiral Vorath, but older, with eyes that held the wariness of ages. You have caused us problems, the ambassador said without introduction. Your transmission has inspired unrest throughout our territory. Nari smiled. It was not a friendly smile. That was the idea. You do not understand the consequences. The Dominion has maintained peace for 12,000 years. Stability, order. Your broadcast threatens everything we have built. Your peace came from conquest, Nari replied. Your stability came from fear. That's not order. That's just a long silence before the storm. The ambassador stared at her for a long moment. You are more dangerous than we realized. Not because of your weapons or your ships, but because of what you represent. You have shown the galaxy that the Dominion can be defied, that fear can be overcome. Yes, Nari said simply. We have. The negotiations lasted for weeks. The Dominion wanted Earth to stop broadcasting. They wanted humanity to stay quiet, to hide, to not inspire other species. In exchange, they offered protection, technology, a place in their empire. Nair refused everything. We will not be silent, she told the ambassador. We will not hide what we are, and we will not join your empire. But here is what we will do. We will talk to every species you have conquered. We will share our history with them. We will teach them what we know about resistance, about survival, about hope. And if they choose to fight, we will not stop them. The ambassador left without an agreement. The Dominion withdrew to consider their options. But everyone knew the truth. They had no good options. Earth could not be conquered without enormous cost. And every day that Earth remained free, more species would start to question whether the Dominion could be defeated. Park Taiho continued his work at the observatory. But now he was listening for something different. Not threats allies. Species reaching out in secret, asking for guidance. Ships traveling toward Earth, carrying refugees and rebels. the first small steps toward something that had never existed. Before, a free alliance of species who refused to surrender, Yunhana spent her days reading messages from across the galaxy. Requests for information. Stories of small victories. News of uprisings that failed and uprisings that succeeded. Each one was a ripple spreading outward from that single transmission. Lieutenant Choi Woo was asked to design new broadcasts. Messages tailored for specific species, specific situations. He built communication systems that could reach the farthest corners of known space. Humanity's voice would not be silenced, and Kong Minji wrote the history of what they had done. Not just for humans, but for everyone. A record of how one species, facing certain destruction, had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. Earth had entered the galactic stage, not as a conqueror or a victim, but as something far more dangerous, a spark, and across the galaxy, the darkness was beginning to burn.